Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Cardano and its native token ADA. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, my goal in these videos is to try and provide as unbiased of a view as I can. I am not always successful in that goal, okay? I also like to do these videos occasionally just to keep us updated on where ADA likely is within the market cycle, okay? Now, as before we get too deep into this video, because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in this video, we're going to talk about the ADA USD valuation, the ADA Bitcoin valuation, the ADA Ether valuation. We're going to look at the ROI after the cycle peak to the low. We're going to look out at the year-to-date ROI. We're going to look at the price drawdown from the all-time high. We're going to look at a lot of things, okay? So before we get into that, one of the reasons why I think it's worthwhile to provide updates is because, you know, ADA is one of those coins that back in 2018, I bought here, thought I was a genius, watched it drop, kept buying, watched it come up here, thought I was a genius again, only for it to eventually put in new lows, right? And it was this brutal process that continued to teach me a lot about how the altcoin market behaves in the bear market years and in the pre-halving years, okay? Because what I saw happen back over here is I saw a lot of altcoins put in new lows even when Bitcoin didn't. You know, I mean, like the low that ADA had back over here in December 2018 was, you know what, like just just below 3 cents. And over here, it actually went below 2 cents, which again, I mean, it might not sound like a lot, but when you actually measure from this wick here all the way down, I mean, that still is another 37% drop. And if you're not prepared for those types of moves, then the altcoin market can, of course, take you by surprise. So I've learned a lot of lessons in the past, and my goal has been to try to communicate those so that people are aware that, hey, you know, this is how the altcoin market typically behaves during the pre-halving year, right? Like it does not always behave how you might expect. Even if Bitcoin goes up a lot, you should not necessarily expect the altcoin market to hold that well during the pre-halving year and sometimes even the early phase of the halving year. So a couple of last videos we've talked about, you know, one was, of course, searching for a cycle bottom. And again, we looked at the ADA Bitcoin valuation. This was all the way back at, you know, at 2,000 sats. And, you know, we talked generally about, sorry, like a bug just got on my leg. We talked generally about how ADA Bitcoin would likely drop to around 800 Satoshis, right? We've talked a lot about this. 800 sats by the summer of 23, but eventually it would likely head on down to 400 Satoshis. And we clarified this in this video over here when we finally hit around 800 sats. I think we went to like about 850 or so. And one of the things I said was that we likely will spend some time in this region before ultimately going down to closer to 400 Satoshis. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but I will remind people, I mean, when we were over here at 2,000 Satoshis, a lot of people didn't want to hear that we were going to 800 sats. And then now that we went to 800 sats, of course, a lot of people don't really want to hear that we might go to 400 sats. But again, I've seen what happens to the altcoin market. Does it have to repeat? Like, does it have to? No, it doesn't. This is just my view, and it's what I've experienced. And so I will continue to sort of follow this blueprint until it clearly deviates. At this point, I don't think there is any clear deviation, right? The other thing that I talked about in this video as well was looking at the ADA Ether valuation, and I was actually bullish about a month ago on the ADA Ether valuation, not in terms of thinking that it's going to go to new highs, but just in the terms of, you know, it's likely going to get some type of mean reversion here in the next few weeks. So let's provide an update on all of that and see where we generally are, okay? So I'd like to first start with the ADA Bitcoin valuation. So, I mean, you can see in general, after going down to this 800 Satoshi level, more or less, I think the low was actually slightly above 800 sats. So let me get it right. If I don't, I'm sure someone's going to say it. So it looks like the low so far has been about 851 sats. We put in sort of a local double bottom here at 868 sats, and now it's bounced back up. Now it has been moving back up to this bull market support band where it's been rejected at many times. Now, there was a bounce back over here in 2018 where it in fact went all the way back up to 2,000 Satoshis. So I suppose that remains to be seen if we could accomplish something like that. But I think the more likely outcome is ultimately to get rejected by the bull market support band. Now, we will see, of course, what happens. Sometimes it can pop above it in the short term, only for it to just fade back down. Now, we've had this chart drawn for a long time, and we will ultimately see if we come down to these levels in the third quarter of this year. We're currently in the third quarter. It is July. And the reason why I've had this on here is because we note that back over here, we came back down to these levels in August of 2019. And we do know that crypto was very cyclical. So in terms of, looking at this video and in terms of the idea of spending some time in this region, that has played out, right? Like we bounced back up to around 1,200 sats, right? We bounced back up, but we still haven't really gone anywhere. Could easily spend a bit more time in this region, right? Like it doesn't have to play out overnight. We could push higher before going lower. A lot of things are possible, but I do think the most likely eventually is that we do see 400 sats, okay? Again, I know it's not a popular view, but again, 800 sats wasn't a popular view when we were at 2,000 sats, and then we still made it there. So we'll see if this actually plays out. Now, again, I mean, you can see that this trend line has been sort of connecting the dots for a long time, and I know you could use this, and I knew that we were going to get to this point whenever we talked about going to 800 sats this summer. We talked about this idea of, when we get down here, we could bounce off of this trend line a few times. And again, maybe some people would look at this and say we hold it. Maybe if you want to take the glass half full approach, you say that we're in some type of macro higher lows and lower highs structure, right? If you want to take the high, sort of the glass half full approach. But I still think there is at least some reason to be concerned as liquidity slowly flows out of the cryptoverse. Okay, so at least in the short term, I think we can say that our general expectations of spending some time between the 800 to 1,200 Satoshi range this summer has transpired, right? That has transpired. We also said, though, that there should likely be some type of mean reversion on the ADA Ether valuation. So the idea is that while, ADA has gotten wrecked on its Ether pair, and one of the concerning things here is that and we talked about this in this video a month ago, was that it looks like it might be a bleeder. Now, that doesn't mean that it always has to be one, but to some degree, ADA has something to prove against ETH, not the other way around, because ADA has been bleeding against Ethereum basically since 2017. I mean, these are just lower highs and lower lows. But in terms of a local move, we talked about how we should see some type of mean reversion, and we are getting that, right? I mean, we can see that ADA Ether has popped up a little bit here. Do note that it can, as you can see, right, it can spend a lot of time down here. Sometimes you get like sort of a low and then a lower low and then it bounces back up. So you could see it fade back down before getting another sustained move back up to the upside. But this is something that I think is worthwhile to consider, is that, hey, the ADA Ether valuation seems to be putting in these lows and it hasn't necessarily convincingly taken out this trend of lower highs and lower lows. Now, a lot of people, I know it's going to upset a lot of people, but I don't control what the charts say, right? Like, I just want to show you what they say. And it's always possible that, that the trend changes, right? I'm not trying to say that it can't change, but again, in this situation, at this time, ADA is the one that has to prove something here against ETH because it is still putting in lower highs and lower lows. Short term, we have seen at least a mean reversion trade back up to the upside. And, I don't know exactly where the bull market support band is, but you can see that it's basically right where we just got that wick to, right? We had that wick right up. Again, the bull market support band can often guide things down until we muster up the courage to break above it. And usually that doesn't happen in a sustained way until liquidity is flowing back into some of these riskier assets. Now, I do want to talk about the ADA USD valuation. That's probably what most people are here to talk about or want to listen to. And what's interesting is if you actually look, before we get into the nitty gritty on the weekly time frame, if you look at, say, like the monthly Heikin-Ashi candles, there's a really interesting trend here. So what you'll see is that you have sort of your bear market year, right? You have sort of a pump that gets everyone to think that, everything's over and that everything's going to go back up again, only for it to fade in the second half of the pre-halving year. And we talked about this at length, that this is going to likely happen for a lot of altcoins, right? Like, that this rally gets faded, and ADA has in fact gone and put in new lows, since then. It went down to a new low over here, and that's what it did last cycle too. And you can see in 2019, we basically saw red monthly Heikin-Ashi candles until December. We rallied for a couple of months and into the recession. Now, of course, you might call that a black swan, but the counterpoint is that we did have an inverted yield curve in 2019, and then we had a recession in 2020. Inverted yield curves don't tell you why you go into a recession. They tell you the economy is sick, and all it takes is one more, all it takes is, one event really to kick you into a recession if the economy is sick. And I think arguably that's one of the things that you can look back up here. Again, we had an inverted yield curve in 2019, and things weren't really looking that rosy at the time. But once you had this major event over here in early 2020, it caused the Fed to print a lot of money. And of course, when they print a lot of money, that goes into riskier assets, right? Like altcoins. Okay. And you saw the altcoin market explode to the upside. So it's interesting because you kind of get this, you have your main bear market, you have sort of your secondary leg down, and then you kind of have your final drop, and then the alt season that you want finally came, right? Bear market year, sort of the secondary fade. Maybe eventually we see things rally into a recession, and then ultimately put in their final lows and then take off from there. But I want to look at this more so on the weekly time frame, and we're going to go back to normal candles here so that we can take a closer look at what's going on here in the short term. So if you look here at the 20-week SMA, the 21-week EMA, you can see that ADA USD has it put in a new low, and then it rallied back up. But at this point, we have not had any weekly closes above either the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA. Now that ranges now from around 33 to 34 cents. Really, I guess you could say about 0.337 to 0.347. So you'd really want to see weekly closes above that, to multiple weekly closes above that, to convincingly start to break the trend. But at this point, that has not yet manifested. And I mean, again, you can kind of see there's a lot of similarities, right, between this trend over here and what happened right here, right? You had in 2019, ADA USD had its first pump up, and then it had a second pump. And then it fell below the bull market support band about halfway through the year, and then once it got below it, it just faded it until December. You had wicks back up to the 20-week, but they were just faded. Similar thing here, right? You have one pump, you have your secondary pump, and we fell below the bull market support band. We have gone back up to it, but at least at this point, it just continues to sort of be a fade. Okay, we'll see if it turns into anything different. But at this point, it really hasn't. I mean, it still is below the 20-week. There's a lot of similarities, okay? And this last cycle was probably the hardest part. So the second half of 2019 was probably the hardest part of the cycle because it wasn't very exciting. It was just like you just watch the altcoin market slowly bleed out, right? And there were certainly a lot of pumps. I mean, no shortage of pumps. We had tons of them, right? I mean, this one right here was 41%. I mean, this one right here was 40% as well, right? We had a lot of pumps like that, and they ultimately just still got faded. Like, look, zoom in here. Look at how the market works, right? Like it goes up for a while, and then you just get one candle to take you down. It goes up for a while, and then you just get one candle to take you down. And we saw that happen in a lot of altcoins. And you see that happen today, right? Like you get a lot of candles that take you up. I mean, it only takes one candle to to completely wipe away all of this. So that's what we saw last cycle. That's what I warned a lot about. And it's one of those things that once you live through it, it kind of gives you a different perspective on the market. It's the reason why back in the summer of 2022, There were a lot of calls for alt season back then by a lot of people, and a lot of calls that the lows were in by a lot of people. And I was like, well, I used to think that last cycle, and boy, was I wrong. And we saw the market capitulate to new lows. And even then, it did not mark the low for ADA because we saw it rally and then fade. And so far, right? I mean, I know it was not a popular view to talk about this, but so far, it hasn't been any different, right? I mean, we saw ADA put in a low into 2022, just like it did in 2018. We saw it pump in 2023, just like it did here in 2019. You got two tops here, just like we got over here. We go below the bull market support band right here, just like it did right here. It has played out almost identically, right? Almost identically as last cycle. And this was one of the reasons why, in the summer of 2022, it was really hard for me to be that bullish on these stuff. Because I'm like, well, historically, I know altcoins can put in new lows, even if Bitcoin doesn't, right? And imagine if Bitcoin does, then where does it leave the altcoin market? Remember, ADA Bitcoin did not bottom last cycle until Q3 of 2019. And even then, ADA Bitcoin held those lows really for half a year before trending back up. At this point, we haven't even convincingly found a level where ADA Bitcoin is holding those lows. Now, is there a possibility that this ends up being the low? It's possible. But again, when, historically, right? I mean, we have two things to compare to here. We have, just when it launched, when we were around 400 sats, and we have over here when we were at 400 sats. I mean, back over here, I guess we were lower. We were below 300 sats. So this was always going to be an area that ADA Bitcoin was going to bounce. And again, we talked about it in this video, that we would likely see it bounce in this range after calling for a capitulation to 800 sats by the summer of 23. So at this point, there has not been a deviation between our prior expectations and what Cardano has done, right? Go to 800 sats approximately, bounce around for a while, eventually capitulate to 400 sats. Hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean it won't. Again, the capitulation to 400 sats in 2019 didn't occur. The final drop, the final low didn't occur until August. So again, last cycle, it took a long period of time to get there. This cycle, there's arguably have been even more excess liquidity. And so it really isn't that different. I mean, it really is a lot of the same. So this is where we are, right? Now, one way to visualize this, and I think it's a really interesting thing, look at the year-to-date ROI of Cardano, okay? So we're the dashed green line. You have 5 prior years to compare to. 5. Now, which one looks the most similar to this year? It's not 2021, is it? It's not 2020 or 2021 at all. So why don't we take those off? It's not 2020. It's not 2021. Is it 2018? No. Is it 2019 or 2022? Sorry, is it 2022? No. And 2 remain, 2023 and 2019. At this point in 2019, the year-to-date ROI of ADA was very similar to what it is today. You're talking about 1.25x off the yearly open versus 1.46x off the yearly open. In 2019, remember, ADA closed the year 20% below its yearly open. That's where it closed the year. So by the end of the year, it closed it 20% below the yearly open, even though it went up more than 2x off the yearly open. And it went up, 4x, maybe like 3 to 4x if you take it from the actual low back in December of 2018. But if you just look from the yearly open, it went up 2.25x. Whereas this time it only went up about 1.82x. Now, the yearly open for ADA was at 20.246. To give you an example of what 10% below the yearly open would put you at, it puts you about 0.219. So right around 20 cents or so. So I think that's what you have to look at. Does does this just follow the blueprint of 2019? It's probably going to deviate some, right? Like maybe it pops out over here and then comes down, or maybe it comes down here and then pops back up. But all in all, I mean, you can see that these trend line, or the year-to-date performance in 2019 and 2023, they've crossed several times, right? They were the same at the beginning of the year. They were the same about 3 months in. They were the same about 4 months in. They've been the same now about 6 to 7 months in. We're probably going to see them be the same 9 months in and 12 months in, or at least, close to each other. It's really interesting when you look at it from a year-to-date ROI perspective. Now, if you measure it from the peak until the final low, we know the final low for ADA came over here in 2020. So about 800 days. We're approaching 700 days. So, I mean, if it wants to repeat what it did last cycle, you're still talking about 3 to 4 months of this, okay? Now, this does look like diminishing losses as a function of time. So Cardano's performance from the peak last cycle was worse than it has been this cycle, basically every step of the way. And maybe it'll continue to be that. So perhaps these lows over here, in terms of the drawdown from the high, would sort of serve as a base, right? Might be worthwhile to think of it like that. But this is something that is worthwhile to follow, I think. And perhaps it's when it gets to these extreme points where you should expect some type of convergence back close to one another, right? So at some points they've gotten closer, at other points they've gotten further apart, but eventually it seems like they tend to converge, much closer as time goes on when they do get to extremes in terms of how much they've diverged from one another. Another way to visualize this is to look at the price drawdown from the all-time high. Look at this chart. I mean, I should not have to spend a lot of time explaining this chart, but I mean, it's a very powerful. I mean, it's interesting, right? So it shows you the drawdown from the all-time high. Well, look at last cycle, guys. I mean, just look at it. Look at how long we spent down here before we finally went back up. I mean, this was still way down here at like 97, 98% off the highs when you don't look at wicks and you just look at daily closes, as late as, March and April of the halving year, which is still like 7 or 8 months away, So it's a slightly tempered version of what we saw last cycle. But the time-based capitulation, that was the hardest part, right? Because, I mean, like in the grand scheme of things, when you look at Cardano from the highs, yeah, I mean, it's gone down a lot. Look at these, look at the yearly candles that we have up, right? I mean, look at this candle. This was 94% down. And then in 2022, it was 81% down. This yearly candle here, I mean, look at this wick. It was a 200% wick, but it still closed the year down negative 18%. This, well, I guess the wick anyways, has been 44% to the upside. Doesn't mean it can't close to the downside. I mean, if it went up 200% over here and closed negative, surely it can here as well. But then look what eventually came, right? I mean, again, you're likely not going to see those more impressive gains until you get back to QE, which the Fed is still, is likely still a ways from, considering inflation, especially core inflation, has remained relatively sticky. So when you look at ADA-USD, it is following a very similar path as last cycle. I just think a lot of people, look at it and don't really want to believe it, and they haven't. But ADA Bitcoin, it went to 800 Satoshis. Okay? That was the area that we were talking about to hit in the summer of 2023. And that's right where we are. We talked about getting a bounce back up to 1,200 sats, and we've seen that. It's interesting because, the news with the SEC and Ripple came out, and yes, the dominance of Bitcoin took a hit, but it's still 50%, right? I mean, it's still above the prior breakout range from 49%. So, I look at this chart, and while I think that there's a good chance that ADA Bitcoin might oscillate in this area, I think eventually it breaks down. And then it's got to find a low down here. and finding some bottoms. So that's, I think, what we're looking at here. Okay, ADA Ether, you know, I mean, as you can see over here, right, it certainly can spend some time in this region. I don't really think you're going to see a major mean reversion play until, you know, a major mean reversion to, say, the upper part of this trend line until probably early next year, right? So early next year, maybe you see ADA Ether double up from where it is right now. But I think the bigger concern is does it end up just being another lower high? You know, like all of these have been, right? Like you got a high, a lower high, lower high. If it does move up, does it just end up being another lower high? That'll be the thing to look for, okay? ADA Bitcoin, we'll see. You know, we'll see what it does here, and if it does go to that 400 Satoshi level or not. If it does, I mean, it you know, history would show that that has been a pretty good level in the past. But I mean, right now we're still at around 1,000 sats. By the way, we were at 1,000 sats in the summer of 2019. Right? I mean, this is June 2019. We were at 1,000 sats. We still went to 400 sats before it was all said and done. So that's, of course, just something to, again, consider as you navigate the cryptoverse. So we've talked about ADA USD. We've talked about ADA Bitcoin, ADA Ether. We looked at the ROI after cycle peak. We looked at the year-to-date ROI and how it compares best to 2019, the pre-halving year. We talked about the price drawdown from the all-time high. Remember what we said. We said that a lot of alts can put in new lows in the pre-halving year, even when Bitcoin's not. Bitcoin has not put in a new low at this point. Cardano already did put in a new low, right? Now, I mean, you know, this is a wick that you maybe should pay attention to, right? I mean, a lot of times when you get wicks like this, like it serves as sort of a base for a while before ultimately breaking back down if it's going to. I mean, not that it has to, but even if it does break down, it can often serve as a base for. I mean, here's another example, right? Like where ADA USD had a pretty massive wick, and from that wick, I mean, if you take this wick, this point here, like how long did it take to break down from that level? It took 22 weeks. So from this wick here, we're currently out about 6 weeks. So again, that's one of the reasons why we can spend time in this region, especially for the ADA Bitcoin valuation and even the ADA USD valuation, right? We can spend some time in this region and it not really be that dissimilar from what we've previously seen. So, I mean, again, I mean, we've seen this, we've seen these patterns many times in the past. We'll probably see them many times in the future. So we've covered a lot. I do hope this is useful to you guys. And I mean, again, eventually we'll get back to looser monetary policy. In the meantime, I think it's fair to just look at a lot of these, you know, a lot of these trend line or these trends on their Bitcoin pairs and their Ether pairs and say, you know what, this is how it's played out in the past. It doesn't have to play out like this time, like that again, but it would probably be at least somewhat prudent to consider that it could be a likely outcome, right? And say, you know what, it's what happened last time. Could happen this time too. And so far, it's what's happening. ADA Bitcoin has trended down. ADA Ether has trended down. ADA USD put in new lows in the summer, in June. So that's where we currently are this cycle with Cardano. I hope that my charts have helped you guys navigate ADA in this cycle. And I hope that my experiences back over here with ADA, I think they've been actually quite useful because you can see that it's played out in a very similar manner, right? Very similar. People think that's the low. It's not. We go down. People think that's the low. It ends up being the low for a while until it's not, right? Until it's not. Happened over here. And this time it's already happened here in 2023. We didn't have to wait for the pre-halving year. So we'll see. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. Again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.